It's showtime for total solar eclipse watchers.
Well, lots of excitement is building for the solar eclipse that will be happening on Friday morning.
It's a question that's mobilised thousands. Where best to view the eclipse?
The only two places that it will cross land are the Faroe Islands and Svalbard, which is up truly in the Arctic.
A once-in-a-generation spectacle that's drawn a crowd from around the world.
And all eyes are on the weather forecast as we need clear skies to be able to view it.
For so many eclipse chasers, it's about so much more than the visual spectacle.
Here we were, a stone's throw from the North Pole, following photographer Reuben Krabbe on his quest to capture a mind-bending photo of a skier in front of a solar eclipse. Visible from only two places, the pursuit for snow had dragged us as far north as we could go for an event that was only going to last 2.5 minutes.
It's not stupid, but it's a difficult situation to put yourself in. Like, it's the most extreme you can get.
Coming this far north in the middle of winter to see an eclipse seemed like absolutely absurd.
Honestly, I thought it was one of the stupider things ever. Like, the chances of it being clear, I don't know what the odds are, but they gotta be like insanely low.
He's like, oh, if you look at my computer, you can see these different settings for these different pictures with all these eclipses that have happened all over the world of action sports. And I'm like, what? Like, let's go skiing, dude.
It was no secret why Brody, Chris, and Cody had come on the trip. They wanted to ski. That left me caught in the middle with the task of trying to squeeze two very different books onto the same page.
If I get to live a full life, there's still only going to be 3 chances in my lifetime to try to chase a photograph like this. And who's to say I get those chances or that it's not cloudy there?
The plan was to set up a remote base camp and explore the mountains while scouting for a location for Reuben's elusive photo. The odds of success were extremely slim, but if uncertainty is the first ingredient of any good adventure, then we had it in spades. Before we ventured anywhere, we needed to understand something of the locals. At over half a ton and a true apex predator, the cute polar bear that we all hoped to see was actually not that cuddly.
Is the part that Steve explained super well, so I'm able to do this part, but I have no idea about the shooting part.
It was borderline morally objectionable for me, because like, I don't think I would shoot a polar bear that was running toward me. And I don't know what I would do if there was a polar bear running toward you.
I really want to see the polar bear like from a nice distance, you know? I think that'd be nice. Oh, that was stressful.
But it was really fun shooting a gun for my first time.
I really am relying on the fact that A, we have guides that are much better at this sort of thing, and B, I can run faster than at least most of the people.
Somehow everyone managed to hit the target, making our guide Steve feel safe enough to head out on a warm-up mission to an abandoned Russian town that he wanted to show us. It was an opportunity to test the sea ice and explore some skiing before our extended base camp in the lead-up to the eclipse.
We haven't actually skied yet. We almost put our ski boots on, but then we found out there were polar bears, so now we're looking at a polar bear. He's surprisingly yellow. I was expecting him to be more white. He is the cutest man-eating predator that weighs 3,000 pounds I've ever seen.
Look at this, look right now, Cody. Yeah, this, what is, it's like a little, he's playing around. He's playing on like an ice cube. This is so cool, dude.
He turned out to be a she, and on the list of cool things to see, the polar bear was right up there. It was puzzling, though, that she wasn't as interested in watching our first descent as she was in finding a seal under the ice.
That polar bear's out there somewhere. He is out there, dude. Ew! First run of the year in Svalbard. Nice work.
At one time, a Russian coal mining town, Pyramiden was home to over 1,000 men, women, and children. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the mine closed, and overnight the people left. And if you're wondering why Russia has a presence in a Norwegian territory, let's just say it's complicated.
Now we're in abandoned Russian town. I just met like the raddest Russian dude ever. But this is different, I would say.
Pyramiden, I like its status of a ghost town. Yeah, because it is a ghost town.
Don't let the coat deceive you. Sasha's friends in St. Petersburg call him a fake Russian since he doesn't drink vodka. Instead, he holds it down with the northernmost statue of Lenin, unlocking vacant buildings for tourists that find themselves here. Despite how eerie it is, Pyramiden has a remote beauty that I could see being an attraction. But for Sasha, there are other upsides too.
Pyramiden is the only place in the world where I have my own room.
You're the best guide in Pyramiden?
I'm the only guide in Pyramiden. I cannot be the best or the worst. I do hope so that you will have a chance to see the eclipse, but be careful because Svalbard is foggy and cloudy. When you see cloudy weather, it's ordinary weather for Svalbard. When you see the sun, it means that you are lucky to see the sun. So good luck to you guys.
Stepping back into the present, if what Sasha said was true, well, we were lucky to have the sunshine. We wanted to make the most of it, as it was a rare opportunity to ski without considering the eclipse. There were still a few kinks that needed to be worked out, though.
I'm just taking mine off my feet right now because I had them on the wrong feet. Ah!
Experience in extreme conditions wasn't exactly this crew's forte, which is why I brought cameraman Bjarne Salen along. As visionary steep skier Andreas Fransen's main expedition partner, together they have logged first descents in some of the most intimidating mountain ranges on Earth.
Can you feel the altitude at all?
Like always.
To say Bjarne was well versed in the art of suffering was an understatement, but no one was prepared for our first obstacle.
Wet Arctic puddles right now.
The last thing you would expect to happen in the Arctic happened when climate change paid us a visit. It rained. We had prepared for the cold and for frostbite, but not for this.
Surprise, surprise. It started raining in the middle of March in the Arctic. I think something's wrong. It's been raining for now, I would say about 18 hours. This is some serious hazard management. We need to think about what we want to do in terms of pushing it and getting out there and destroying a lot of equipment and, you know, the trip.
On a reconnaissance mission 3 weeks earlier, Steve had a close encounter when his snowmobile broke through the ice and sank in a foot of water. When we learnt the story, we had to question the logic in hiring a computer science dropout from Oxford, England, to lead us into the frozen wilds.
It's very difficult to eat without a spoon. I once forgot my spoon, and I used a wrench from my snowmobile toolkit, and that wrench stuck to the inside of my mouth. I was there on a glacier, you know, with the wrench in my mouth. It's frozen in my mouth. You have to bring spoons.
After a helicopter evacuation and wet feet, the crisis was averted, and Steve was apparently wiser for both those experiences.
So the weather the day before this happened was pretty much identical to how it is right now.
100%.
And we were going to leave tomorrow.
This is worse.
That's great. Okay.
So that's why we're delaying.
That's why.
The storm is reaching a peak, I think. And first of all, the top of the town went out, probably Nebian first, in the middle of the town. And apparently it's worked its way down to the university, and now all the streetlights are out too. And we haven't had this all year. So, welcome, Salomon, to Svalbard.
Reuben's like the artistic genius where he's like thinking about his shot kind of all the time, but a lot of like real life stuff just flies right over his head, you know?
Reuben is like possibly one of the most awkward guys I've ever been in the mountains with, but I think it's because he's like a borderline genius.
It was disturbing to think that our Pied Piper was a 24-year-old with peach fuzz for a beard, whose covert plan seemed to be adding to his exotic yoga pose series. Growing up east of the Rocky Mountains, Reuben picked up his father's old Pentax at 15, learning the craft shooting friends before making a splash at 21 with an outrageously awesome photo of the Northern Lights.
This idea of chasing an eclipse is basically just the next extent of that same concept.
He's like the dweeb that found out about this eclipse that wanted to follow it all the way to the North Pole.
You need a special kind of person to be so focused on something like this. And Reuben has this focus more than anybody else.
That's what gets you an eclipse shot, is being able to dream that big. Like that's a huge amount of imagination, and not everybody can do that.
This is probably the one time in my lifetime that I get to try to shoot this photo.
It's a bit of pressure, eh?
Yeah, what if it doesn't work out?
This is the most gear I've ever seen. However, I mean, it makes sense. We're gonna be living nicely for a week or two, so I'm stoked on it. But it's a lot of stuff, especially a lot of stuff to pull behind snowmobiles over like that much ice.
Over the rooftops into the sea.
Psych, packed up for a huge adventure. It's gonna be awesome. Stoked.
Don't ask me, we have to get there first. GPS track is here and continues into that. So I guess we're gonna have to find another route to our base camp today.
But I thought computers were always right.
Computers are always right, but computers, yeah, they die from water too.
Sea ice wasn't Steve's problem last time. It was the river valleys, and we had to cross one to make it to the glacier on the other side.
Yeah, this is what we were worried about after the storm. Probably like 4 centimeters. We've had some freezing, we had cold temperatures last night, so I feel pretty confident about it. It's good.
Clear yet. Yeah, glad he's all right and nobody's wet. So we'll get these other sleds across and good to go.
Stan suffered nothing more than dented pride and a purple butt cheek while giving us a sobering dose of reality at how quickly things can go wrong. After 7 hours, we made it to our glacier camp for the lead up to the eclipse. With 12 days of food, 2 generators, and believe it or not, a heater for the mess tent, we thought we were the cat's meow. Perched at the head of the Fridtjof Bryn Glacier, the views were pretty darn spectacular, except Bjarne spoiled my epic drone shots by stamping out a huge penis on the glacier. It was difficult to stay mad at Bjarne though, because it was great to see him back in the mountains after the recent death of two of his close friends in an avalanche.
The 29th of September last year, 2014, when the accident happened in Chile, it was a bit of a shock because I lost my two best friends, Andreas and JP, and after that I've been taking a bit of a step back because I wanted to reflect on life and everything I've been doing.
Andreas was a friend to everyone on the team, but he was a brother to Bjarne. And while this trip meant different things to everybody, for Bjarne it was a big step towards rekindling the passion that he and Andreas shared.
This is kind of Bjarne's first trip back in the mountains since Andreas' accident, and I can't imagine how hard that would be, but he's so stoked that he's back.
This is how nice it is to be in Svalbard.
Sometimes I cry, but I didn't want to cry too much because it was so cold, so I know it would just freeze. So I just had to stop myself crying a bit. But that was one moment when something is beautiful and you find peace, you know? And then I know Andreas would be like so stoked to be there.
I love my job.
Well, he's had a lot of tragedy in the last couple of years, like a lot of close friends that passed away, and he could have walked away for sure.
It's worth spending time with people out here, and we're not doing the most crazy lines, you know? We're here and shooting some beautiful skiing in a beautiful environment, and you wouldn't be able to experience that if we weren't here to ski.
Twice a day, but lately keeps the devil from my door. But it makes me rich and it makes me poor. I'm a beggar in the morning, I'm a king at night. My belt is loose and my trigger is tight. And they come without warning, at the speed of the light. Make it shine so pretty, make it shine so bright.
So far, the scouting was working out great for the athletes, but finding a spot for Reuben where the sun, moon, skiers and camera would align was easier said than done.
Day 2 on the glacier, and yeah, we're going for it. We got some cool spines behind us that might work for the Eclipse, and we kind of just got to go up and get a feel for the snow. We've talked in circles for 2 days now, and so it'll be good to just see if we can even ski any of this stuff.
I can't say that the snow's awesome or that it's very warm up here, but it's really windy too, if you didn't notice. Why am I yelling? What are we yelling about?
Even if this location had have worked, standing in the wind for 2 hours during the eclipse wasn't realistic. Someone was going to get frostbite. And while the cold took its toll on the skiers, the pressure was beginning to show on Reuben.
The Eclipse team, yay!
I think I've been a bit too cryptic with the ideas that I have. Like I had 4 or 5 different ideas of what I wanted to do or could do. And now it's boiling down to we just want to find one place to make one shot. So the really, really difficult one, which I don't really expect to try, would be getting a person inside the surface of the sun, and the surface of the sun would be golden color and everything else would be pitch black. To do that shot, we need really clear skies, and the lenses need to be like at least 1.5 kilometers away from the action.
Svalbard might have been the only place in the world that we were going to see the eclipse, but it was also a veritable skier's buffet. A landmass that was once part of Pangaea 200 million years ago, it is now a remnant from the bare-knuckle fistfight with the Earth's forces that bullied it from below the equator to where it is now at 80 degrees north.
I've never seen a place that is as stacked with as many couloirs as here. Like, it's just left and right couloir town.
I expected the terrain in Svalbard to be cool, but not like the sickest terrain in the world. But we show up and we see walls of couloirs just stacked.
Looks like how the rock at one point just turned vertical. Like it was the whole earth went upwards.
I could come back here every year and never be bored. I'm sure there's so much to explore here.
Yeah, buddy.
Before the trip, Steve emailed me a single photo that I posted to our Facebook group. It was the cheese that lured the skiers into Reuben's little trap, and they had taken the bait. But due to conditions and scouting for the Eclipse, the reward was proving difficult to reach.
That alone was enough reason for the skiers to be psyched to come here. On a personal level, that was the one objective, was to go ski that face.
Skiing, the Eclipse, all our plans were put on hold when the Arctic slapped us with snow and winds that threatened to bury camp.
This is when winter camping gets really fun, because yeah, it's kind of survival based.
Chris was right. It was survival based. Yet he had very different ideas about what it takes to survive.
You know, when you're camping, everything's a little bit more difficult, and definitely going to the bathroom is like a super big pain in the ass.
I mean, there was many other things that we could have improved with the camp, but the toilet was magnificent. It was the WC of the century.
Finishing touches on the new throne. Oh, yeah.
It was hard to deny that Chris had done us all a favor. When it's minus 20 and there's snow blowing up your wazoo, it doesn't do much for morale. No amount of coffee and a comfy throne could top the enthusiasm, though, when the weather cleared to deliver us a shot at the crown jewel.
The Facebook wall. Dun, dun, dun. We got one photo, and we had this little Facebook group with the people on this trip.
So the one picture that we had posted to our Facebook group was just of this one mountain with these like craggy summits.
Came and visited it earlier in the trip, but the snow didn't look good, and the snow actually looks pretty shreddable right now.
That's wild, man. After like seeing pictures of this wall and coming all the way to Svalbard for it, and now being on top of it.
It's a beautiful, beautiful face. Like if it was in Alaska, you'd go ride that face. If it was anywhere, you'd go ride that face. So it was pretty much the single most anticipated ski run that we had. One of the best runs of the trip. That zone has some of the coolest couloirs, some of the raddest features, some of the longest vert that we found, and pretty much dumps you almost into the ocean. It's a pretty incredible spot.
Oh, that was fun! That was so fun!
It was an apex of the trip. It was like, okay, like this once again is like a really hard thing to make happen, and we just nailed it. And like now we have the next big thing to look forward to.
The Eclipse was beginning to feel like the day before Christmas, except the neurotic in-laws and aunt that you don't like were coming for dinner. It was going to be awesome, but it was also going to be stressful.
To be truthful, I wouldn't really say I'm stoked right now because I just don't see anywhere that I want to be set up, and it just feels like there's so little amount of time left that I want to sort of key in on something and be like, okay, yes, I see that, I see a photo, and I don't right now, so that's feeling really, really tough. More options, more scouting, more making athletes angry.
I'm just hoping it's here, done with. I mean, it'll be really cool to see it, but there's been so much built up about it. It's kind of like, okay, come on, just get it over with.
And now it's like, whatever, 20 hours away, less.
Yeah.
At this point, I've just pared down my expectations to trying to get 1 or 2 really beautiful photos, and that's really what I wanted to come away with from this trip, but I didn't want to predict anything too much.
Well, we're gearing up for the eclipse. It's the eclipse day. Coldest day yet. It's minus 20 out there. Howling winds from the north, which really warm things up. But the good news and the most incredible thing ever is that it's clear, so we might actually get to see this eclipse. Whether we ski in front of it, who knows, but I think we're gonna be pretty lucky if we just get to see this thing.
I think we're pretty lucky if we don't lose any toes today.
My soldier, beloved, when we fall off the
Absolute chaos. An hour and a half disappeared really quickly. The eclipse is starting, so now I'm panicking a little bit already.
all night, the sound will come back again.
We had to come to this frigid island to watch the moon pass in front of the sun. And as stupid as that sounds, it's pretty awesome, actually.
My poor heart,
11:09, you've got like 1 minute.
Holy shit! You don't even need it! Look at it!
your sweetness, and we fall off the air. All night, the sound will come back again.
Oh my gosh! So fucking
All night, the
Oh my goodness, that was better than I thought it could have been! I hope I didn't fuck that up.
My soldier, beloved, when we fall off the earth, your wrinkles, your sweet neck, and we slip off the earth. All night, the sound will come back again. All night, the sound will come back again.
That was tense, but
Oh man.
It's the exact photo that we said was so hard to pull off and such a low chance of success. And there's this drawing. Yeah, we got this photo. We got the impossible shot.
The eclipse really blew my mind.
I can't believe it, but it worked. It totally worked out.
That was pretty crazy. Like, that's definitely something I'll remember for the rest of my life.
To see it was a big, beautiful shivers down your spine. It was just magical.
Like, it is one of the most, like, just insane things you will ever see.
It was the most magical experience. I had no idea it was going to be like that.
It felt like a sci-fi movie. It felt like something completely alien.
Having seen it happen and through the lens and knowing that you were getting those photos that you were dreaming of was one of the most euphoric experiences I've had ever.
Beatmaker da canto.
Whoa! That was pretty cool to
Hey.
relive. It's been a while.
Yeah, definitely been a while since I watched it. Brought back a lot of really good memories.
There were memories of how cold it was?
I just think it's like such a crazy, like how many different storylines there was on that trip. Like all the different experiences, like other than the eclipse itself, like that was like the clinch or whatever, but it was like going to Pyramid and all the, like everything. It was like, yeah. And Benella did such a good job of putting that together.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so we're getting prompted to don't forget to introduce ourselves, even though it says our names. But yes, I'm Cody Townsend. That was a Svalbard trip, my first ever winter camping trip of my life, which I actually lied to get onto. Benello asked me if I had winter camp before, and I said, yeah, for sure. So that was the first one.
Yeah, I'm Chris Rubens, and yeah, that was the Eclipse trip was quite the production. I remember Benello getting in touch with me about it very early on, just to help with logistics and stuff like that. And yeah, it was pretty cool to be a part of that trip and just the logistics and troubleshooting that went along with it. That's like definitely was one of my favorite parts about that whole thing.
Mm-hmm. I'm Reuben Krabbe. I'm the photographer in the film. And for me, it was sort of funny because I brought this idea to Salomon, and then immediately they were like, this sounds really cool. And then I started trying to tell them, no, this is actually a bad idea. The chances are so low that this is like, we probably shouldn't send a crew all the way up there. And they're like, no, like that's why we like it. And yeah, it turned into the craziest trip of my life.
For sure. Okay, so first question looks like it's directed to me. Nate Spitek wants to know, Cody, was the hardest part about this being your first winter camping trip? Well, just not knowing what to expect, really. We did I think it was like our first or second day there. We did like a trial run, and we went out in this like whiteout gnarly storm to go set up our tents and whatnot. And I just remember like trying to set up a tent and gale force winds and thinking like, well, this is where we're going to sleep, and not having ever experienced that before. I just kind of thought, well, this could be a little bit gnarlier than I thought it was. But then ended up being really easy. Like the first few days were definitely tough, and learning your systems and learning how to get out of your sleeping bag properly and how to layer properly and how you're going to, you know, figure out what works best for you. But I would say after day 4, it just felt comfortable. It just became normal. So kind of I learned that even on a trip as rugged as that, for how cold it was and how crazy the conditions were, how comfortable I ended up becoming, that winter camping was actually pretty sweet, and I was very into it.
I like also go and say though, like that was like, I think more looking back on it now, like doing all the trips is like, that was like one of the gnarlier camping trips that we could have gone on. Like, yeah, we did have the heater and stuff like that, but we were doing polar bear watch. So like winter camping is not that bad, except for like, I think the worst part is like getting out of your sleeping bag and getting into your sleeping bag. You have that like couple minutes there where you feel like you're going to die of cold or whatever. And so with the polar bear watch, we'd have to get up in the middle of the night and get out of your warm sleeping bag, go out into the elements and freeze your ass off for like I think it was an hour we were doing.
Yeah.
And then get back in. So like you just like made that, you had to do that process twice as much as you normally do winter camping, you know? Yeah.
For sure. So Andrew Stark wants to know if we have any plans to return to the area to ski. I don't have any specific plans. I would love to go back. What about you guys?
I remember on our last days we were looking south across the glacier that we were camped on, and looking at all of these lines that our guides were saying, like, no one's touched that one, that one, that one, that one. And we're like, oh yeah, we're going to be back next year, this time, this. And I would love to go, but no plan right now.
Yeah, I mean, if I had unlimited budget and didn't feel bad about flying around the world these days, I'd definitely go there. The terrain was incredible. I remember that. I just remember there being a lot of really skiable stuff there that was very intriguing to go back, but no plans.
Yeah. What were the 3 key learnings or takeaways for you, all 3 from the trip? I don't know, Reuben, you start.
Bring a really, really good crew. That was one of the things that Steve, our guide, talked about, was just everyone has a certain skill set, and bringing people who fill all of the different gaps can achieve something really difficult. Because if I went out with one skier and tried to pull this off in Svalbard, there would have been absolutely no chance. And I still think of that quite frequently from here on. Chris?
I think like, to me, like the whole thing was that like you like Reuben brought this to Salomon as like this crazy idea, and like he was saying before, he's like, okay, this idea is happening, and he's like, no, you don't understand, like this is impossible, like, or virtually impossible. But it's like the classic, like, you really don't know unless you try. You can have like, you can sit at home and like figure out all the problems that you're going to go to, and it just seems overwhelming, but you kind of just have to go give it a chance and see how it goes. You know, I think that's like my biggest learnable. Like when you think about it when you talk about it at home, you'll be like, there's no way that's actually going to happen. Like, what if this, what if that, what if this? But you really don't find out until you just go and try it. Cody?
Oh, we lost Cody.
Oh, Cody's frozen in time.
Oh, yeah, there we go. I come back. I don't know what's going on. My key takeaway was a lesson from our guide, Steve, who was just filled with unbelievable quotes and thinkings. It was just one of the funniest human beings. But the one I always take away is budget the fine, which means if you're doing stuff that's questionable, yeah, you just put it in there that you might be doing something questionable, put the fine that you might get in your budget. So I know that's probably not the best advice in life, but really stuck with me.
Yeah, to be clear, there were no fines involved in the making of the film.
No, we budgeted, but we didn't. No one got fined for anything, so we're all good.
Yeah, and
there's
always
one
bring a spoon too, right? Like instead of a wrench. That's such a ridiculous
Yes.
story.
There's one question here asking
Reuben.
where can people buy a picture from the film, and if you contact me through my website, I can set you up with whatever you're looking for. I don't have like a store to go through, just send a message to the contact form.
Yeah. How long it took you to get in position for the shots? Well, for the Eclipse day, I think like we were standing in position at least an hour before, and we'd done like we were actually getting really cold, and I remember just having to take like little turns and then run back up and like take 3 turns and run back up to stay warm. So we were standing there for an hour, maybe more, before the eclipse actually happened, just trying to wait for it to be in the perfect position. Yeah, and then the viz, it was actually quite crazy how dark it got. I remember I had like normal goggles on, and then all of a sudden had to put them up on my head and was like skiing without goggles on because it was so practically dark for skiing. But it was it was incredible. I definitely, yeah.
Well, and when we had like totality, like when it like really went fully behind the sun there or whatever or in front, we all stopped. Like I remember there was like 2 minutes there where we just like, you couldn't do anything. That's like what Bjorn's like pointing the camera does. We're all like, you have these like kind of like, you're like howling at the moon, like full like animalistic style. I remember like you're doing it instinctively. It was such a crazy like moment. Like you wouldn't be able to like ski then. It was just crazy.
Mm-hmm. It's like, you don't even think of it as a normal thing that the sun is in the sky, but it's like almost as if gravity disappeared for a moment. You just start be like freaking out because everything appears just wrong to your instincts. For Anthony and myself on the ground getting in position, we spent about an hour and a half trying to chase around on this glacier, trying to figure out exactly where we were going to have to be. And then as the sun kept disappearing behind the ridge, we had to reposition constantly. So it was constant motion and really hard to track.
Yeah. Next one's, how many runs did you get up and down? Well, during the eclipse, we were like actually just doing like 2 or 3 turns and then running back up and doing 2 or 3 turns. And we were just kind of cycling between Brody, Chris, and I, and just like duck behind the ridge while someone skis down. We were just doing everything we could to like get as many shots and chances as possible. And that's why it goes down to it. No one really knows who was actually in that main photo, which was the cover photo of Powder Magazine, because it was so chaotic, and obviously we're just silhouettes at that. We were discussing it before this live feed. We all think it's Chris, but no one truly knows, nor have we really sought it out, because I think one of the things was we were all in this together, and we were all just kind of working hard for it, so it doesn't really matter who individually it was.
Mm-hmm.
How does skiing in such a remote place with medical help so far away affect your preparation and risk? Chris, why don't you answer that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and interesting enough, like if you've been following the Salomon site, there was a thing about Pierre Mueller on there, and he's this like incredible doctor guide that works in France, and he was along for the trip. So obviously this is like as remote as it gets. You're like totally on your own. So rule number 1 is by far is like, don't get hurt, don't get in those situations. Like risk taking is way lower, I think. It's just especially with the cold too, like that it was so gnarly cold. If anything did happen, it would be really bad. But it was really very thankful that Salomon realized like this type of thing and put in the budget that we could bring in Pierre for that, because if something was to go wrong, we really like, he was our best chance that you could possibly imagine. But yeah, I mean, I think it's very much the fact of like not getting hurt. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I would say with the cold and whatnot, like you have a broken ankle, and if you didn't have a doctor there or you didn't have the necessary training, a broken ankle and being a 14-hour, 10-hour snowmobile ride back to town with very little chance of helicopter rescue, that broken ankle could turn into like you potentially dying of hypothermia. So you definitely factoring all of that in.
In the whole film, you don't even see anyone's skis come off of the ground. There's literally not a jump because we're looking at all of this type of risk assessment. Next question here is, how long in advance did I have this idea? I had the idea for this based on a photograph from Grant Gunderson where he shot at night with a long exposure where you see the earth turning. And then I wrote down a couple ideas based on that maybe you could do this with the Northern Lights, maybe you could do this with an eclipse. So I think it was 3 or 4 years, but I didn't really start taking any of it seriously until Salomon came back and said, like, yeah, we're sort of interested.
Yeah, with all your experience from the 50 project, how does it look back on the shots where you put crampons on the wrong feet? Pretty hilarious. And it just wasn't that long ago, I guess. It's crazy how new this was to me and how, I just go back then. What I really remember is using all the crampons and ice axes and being like so nervous on the way up, and like Chris coaching me through stuff, being like, yeah, doesn't it feel so good to be locked in with the stuff? And I'm like, yeah, but I'm still scared. And just to go from that point to where I am now, which is, it's only been like about 5 years right now. So I've learned a lot in 5 years, but that was the trip that started it. Reuben.
How do you cope with camera batteries running empty during the cold for time lapses during the night? You can take the little disposable toe warmers and just tape them to the outside of a camera to help keep it warmer. And then otherwise just be keeping all your batteries on your person. For photographers, it's relatively easy because we only have these pretty small batteries. But for Benello and Bjarne, they actually had they look like the Michelin Man, just full of batteries. They had batteries top to bottom, so they were trying to keep them warm in that way. Next question was Andrew Stark. How did you have communication with photographers and skiers on the ridge? We all have a walkie-talkie with us, so we're communicating to ridge and back, so we could keep everyone in order. And there was it's sort of confusing with me being Reuben and Chris being Rubens. That ended up being quite frustrating a lot of the time. But it was harder because for the filmers on the ground, we are sort of looking at this ridge line and saying higher and lower, but we have no way to relate that to how the skiers feel because they're just on a ridge. They can't see the way that they line up with the sun in the background. So it was very, very confusing, and it was testing some people's patience for sure on the ridge.
Yeah, it was because the Reuben and Benello were moving down. They'd be like, "Okay, just turn right where you did last time," and then you'd turn there and be like, "No, that's not the spot," and you're like, "That's the spot." It was definitely some heated words over the radio, but there's absolutely no way you could do that without a radio. There's not a chance. Yeah, I mean that's ski filming in a nutshell. Anything that you're doing, you need that communication. Brad wants to know, with the swings and weather conditions, namely calm to strong winds, did they impact how you analyzed? I'm guessing how you analyze snow conditions. Yeah, so in the movie you see us back in Longyearbyen, and we had this huge snowstorm. I can't remember how much it precipitated, but it was quite a lot. So there was a really gnarly rain layer because it rained to the top, and then a bunch of snow on top of it. So I remember going out there pretty tentatively, and we had a huge snowmobile ride in where we saw a bunch of slides. And then it doesn't totally show it through the movie, but we definitely we were there for I think 10 to 14 days on the glacier. I can't remember exactly what it was, but we definitely like kind of eased into it, and we didn't have a ton of weather inputs. It stayed cold pretty much the whole time. So any sort of wind slab faceted out pretty quickly, and generally speaking, we had really good avalanche conditions. There was no problems, but we definitely like kind of eased into it. Like the first stuff was pretty small and mellow.
A lot of that was disorienting for sure, because we've also worked throughout crevasse terrain in British Columbia, but not in the high Arctic, where things you just assume are going to be running in a different way. And that took some time to also figure out how much confidence we have to be able to like walk across this glacier even on rope and how to move.
Yeah, and I remember one of the craziest things about snow and being that Svalbard's like a Arctic desert was like you'd had this just like natural hollow feeling to it in places, and it took, I remember just like punching up stuff and feeling like, whoa, this is really slabby, and then having to like adapt your kind of analyzation of the snow to the fact that it gets so little snow and it's so cold, and what is it actually doing? Like to me, if that snow you found in like, let's say the coast, you'd get off it immediately because it was just faceted out and the whole thing was going to slide. But up there, the way things were working, things were kind of pretty bonded. And as Chris said, it was like surprisingly stable, even though like it felt weird, you know, it was definitely not typical snow or snowpack.
Yeah, and I found like, I mean, this is a massive generalization, but when I go places that's very windy, so Svalbard was one of them, Iceland's another, South America. I haven't been to New Zealand to ski, but I imagine it's the same. When you get so much wind, it really breaks down the snow particles into balls, and it into like kind of facets, and it really bonds together much better than you would expect. I always find in those kind of areas. It's a weird, it takes like Cody says, it takes a little bit of getting used to, because you kind of like, it all feels like a bit of a slab. But it just, yeah, it seems to work out.
Next question, Reuben, you nerd out on camera gear and optics.
Really long lens, like one of the ones that you're seeing on the side of a golf course or something. So that's like a 400 mil, which is sort of as long as your forearm or so. And then we had to, the actual, like the famous shot with a golden colored sun, you're actually shooting the surface of the sun. So we need to cut away a ton of that light. So I have a filter on it that's like if you stacked up 10 layers of sunglasses in a row. It's extremely dark, so that when you point it at anything other than the sun, it's completely black. So back to that radio communication question, that's why it was so hard. If I'm looking at the sun in this lens, I can only see the sun and nothing else. And then the other photos, as soon as it goes to that 2 minutes of totality, it's extremely dark. It's like on a normal day, like 20 minutes after sunset. So then we had to pop those filters off of our lenses and then try to switch through all these settings. And that was where we were trying to prepare prior to the shoot to make sure you've got 2 minutes. You don't want to miss this. You don't want to mess it up. So you had to be prepared to work with all of those variances within this very short amount of time.
They're wondering how far away you were too.
Roughly 600, 800 meters. So far enough that you would not be able to even yell that distance. You could see the person with the naked eye walking on the ridge, but you're also staring at the sun. So that was incredibly hard too. Was it all trial and error?
Christian lives up there. Go ahead.
Sorry. There was one more question. Was it all trial and error, or did I know which settings I would use? I had downloaded some shots off the internet of previous eclipses to try to get a feeling for it so that I could not have to guess and check the whole time, that I'd be able to go to one setting and then be probably one more guess check and then good. Then the other question that Cody was getting to there, Christian lives up there and wants to know, I could not recognize the mountainside you took the photo on, so which mountain did you ski on? That was
I don't
right
remember
up,
the name.
It was right up by the Facebook wall. It's like the extension of that ridge. And that mountain had a name in a non-English language that was like either a mohawk or like a chainsaw, because it looks sort of like that stripy kind of thing. The glacier was the Fridtjof Glacier, if that helps.
Kenny wants to know, would you go on another eclipse if you could throw air on a non-remote volcano in Argentina? Yeah, I mean, I would go see an eclipse again. It definitely was pretty amazing, and as you could tell from our reaction live to it, it's just like I remember being like thinking, eclipse, whatever. Watch the sun, go behind the moon, and then when it happens, it's just like pretty mind blowing, and it's something you can't really prepare for. So to see it again, I'd be into it.
Yeah, I know. Like, was it 2 summers ago? There was one that went over North America, and it was only like 80% in Revi here, and a lot of people went traveling to go see the whole thing. And once I saw the 80% one, I was like, oh man, I blew it. I totally should have traveled to go see it again. Like I regretted not going to see it. I'd definitely go and see another one.
Yeah.
Question for Cody from Neil Jones. Cody, when was the first time you met and spent time with Bjarne?
Yeah, this was the first time I'd met Bjarne. I think for most of us it was. I think, like you guys, we all knew who Bjarne was, of watching him with Andreas Franzen and what he was doing and their films together, and all those guys' exploits in the mountains from Chamonix to South America and New Zealand, Alaska. But yeah, that was the first time I got to meet Bjarne, and as you can tell from the film and what we're doing now, he's just like one of the nicest, most friendly, happy individuals on the planet, and just loves life and loves the mountains, and is a really good guy to spend time in the mountains with, just for his personality, and then also because he's obviously very, very skilled in the mountains. And it was nice to have someone like that on this trip, and continues to be nice to have him on all the trips I'm currently doing. Well, not now.
Yeah, I forgot about it in the movie, like that it was kind of his first trip back from Andreas and JP down there. I totally forgot about that whole element of the trip. It was like interesting to bring that back.
Yeah. Carl Frederick Svensson, how long does it take to plan a trip to Svalbard like you did? Well, luckily, I don't know, mainly Bonello, the director, was involved in the filming, the director of the movie was involved in the planning. But I mean, we started talking about it in the fall, and I would say it was 3 months straight of Bonello focused on the planning of that trip. Like there's a lot that goes into it, and a lot of gear, a lot of knowledge, a lot of data, a lot of factors that go into planning it. So yeah, when you're big in those big expeditions, it takes months.
For Steve, our guide, it was also hard to plan that specific trip because of the eclipse happening in Svalbard, and the population of Svalbard is only maybe like 1,000 or 2,000 people. And then instantly as this eclipse happened, the whole world wanted to try to come to this one town. So we actually didn't even have a place where we could have stayed. If there was a massive storm during the eclipse, we wouldn't have been able to go back to a hotel during it because the whole town was booked out. So for him to even source snowmobiles during that time was extremely hard, and ended up complicating things a ton.
Yeah. Ricky wants to know, any gear or cameras broken during the trip, or is there any valuable things broken or lost?
I lost a laptop because I was heating it on top of the stove. So that had to get replaced after the trip. And luckily I didn't lose any photos doing that.
I don't remember that. I do remember us.
And we also had that crazy, like right at the end of our camping trip on the glacier, we had a crazy storm, and we basically and a bunch of snowmobiles had broken by then, and we packed up as much as we could grab, but that wasn't everything. And we just got out of
camp or whatever, and then we got back to Långebyn and had to come back a couple days later to pick up the pieces and drag some snowmobiles out. But I don't remember losing too much, or I mean, I'm sure that Steve lost a few snowmobiles, or they didn't work as well after that trip, anyways.
Yeah, I think we lost a few brain cells for at the party after our first night back in town.
Yeah, as you do.
How much input did the guides have in the line shot in this film, or was it all your choice?
I think like those are like any trip. It's like to some degree it's a group decision. Like if you're stoked on something, you decide if you want to go ski it or whatever, and a guide will help you out with those decisions. Like hopefully for the most part you don't be like, hey, I want to go ski that, and the guide's like, you're crazy. Like that's like totally unacceptable, and that means that someone's on the wrong wavelength. But that so rarely happens. I hardly ever see that. Most of the time it's like this group discussion of like where you should go, and a lot of it has to do with like light, where's the light coming in, and then you as a group decide whether it's safe and how to get up and down it.
How did you feel after the eclipse was over, Reuben?
Very, very stoked. I was stressed about getting the shot for myself, but then also just because this was the whole goal of the trip. If this shot didn't sort of succeed, or if seeing the eclipse didn't work, it was going to feel like I was failing on behalf of this project, which for Salomon Freeski was the biggest trip that they had sort of ever done. So there was a lot of pressure, but then like we were saying, the emotional reaction you have to this eclipse is really, really cool and really intense. So it was this huge cobweb of all kinds of emotions, and it felt really, really good to just be done and to know that we had succeeded too.
I remember being really, really cold. And that was like, it was so cold on that ridge, and I didn't know it at the time, but when I came back, I actually ended up with black on my toes from that day.
Yeah.
I remember wanting.
I
think it was like what
day. Sorry.
I just remember it was like when we woke up that day, it was like one of the coldest days we had, and that was like one of the big conversations that morning was like, yes, there's an eclipse, but like we got to keep in check our feet and toes. Like nobody can go out there and like get like in trouble because of the eclipse or whatever. And yeah, I remember my toes feeling cold, but I didn't remember them being that cold. But yeah.
Yeah. Reuben, were you crying when you got the shot?
No, I was very excited. Maybe I had a little tear of happiness, but not a whole bunch of weeping going on during that at all. Do you ever have do any of you guys have a last run rule? Like, don't call last run. Cody?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely do. You always call, let's take two more and skip the last.
But what about when you're doing just like one big mission for a day? Your only run is your last run.
Totally. So you don't have to say last run. You just take your run.
It's the only run.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm getting less superstitious as I get older. I mean, when I was younger, you know, you have like your boxers that are your good luck boxers and blah, blah, blah. And in the end, if the one thing I do still is I put my left foot boot on first. I always put my left boot on my right foot. And it's actually an interesting thing. It's like a routine that I go through. And then if I'm like, oh, I put my right foot on, I'm like, whoa, like what's off? Because like I feel like I'm off. It's like more of like a routine thing than a superstition thing, I think.
Yeah, same here. It's like, to me, if I put my right foot on, I know I'm not thinking clearly. My mind's in another space or whatnot. And then I'm like, okay, maybe you should reevaluate what your mindset is like for the day if you're not doing this correctly.
Yeah, I think we have a final question here. What ski gear did you guys use on the trip?
I think if you guys have watched the movie, which hopefully you have at this point, that year we got these big Salomon down jackets, like 800 fill, total like expedition style, and those were like a total lifesaver. Like we spent all of our time in those jackets, and like most of the time you had a puffy jacket underneath those too. So that was like the one key part of that whole thing.
For sure. I've never worn more layers in my life than on that trip. And then I think we were all on the old MTN, was it 114, the Mountain or I forget the exact name of that ski, but it was like a lightweight, wide ski that Andreas Franzen had designed, and that was my first trip on them. I think I was surprised. I was amazed to see those back in the mix.
Yeah, and then we all had the MTN boot, like the touring boot that we all still use now and still use and love. And the QST backpack is the perfect ski touring backpack. Salomon plug.
Yeah,
it definitely was a good trip to test out gear though. I learned a lot about what worked and what didn't. Like I remember like at the start I would put on like tons and tons of layers, and then your down would actually get compacted, but it would turn out that it was actually warmer the less stuff you put on and let your down really baffle. That was something that I didn't know at the time. I remember learning.
Yeah. There's one more that I guess kind of with Reuben. What kind of big projects you got going on?
After Eclipse came out, everyone was asking her like, what's the next thing? And I took a couple years of not really addressing that. And then last year ended up completing something that was not necessarily as low chance, but definitely much more complicated, which was a shot like this of skiing in outer space, but this time shot at night and trying to sort of make it look like it's the Hubble telescope shooting skiing. And that film called Nebula was released in the fall and did a couple film festivals and whatnot. And then you can also see it at nebula-film.com, or there's a link on my website if you're interested in it. And I had actually also invited Cody out to try to go shoot that because the primary skier who I was going to use for it was busy. But then he went and skied Mount Currie for the 50 project, and they were talking about how during the day it was all so bitterly cold, and then at night we went out and shot this ridiculous midnight telescope shot.
Yeah, I think it's also like it was really cool to watch the film again. I haven't watched it, and it was like so well put together. So like a big thanks to Anthony Bonello. He directed it. He had like kind of the vision of like how the film would actually, how we'd like portray showing this whole thing. And I thought it was really cool. Like, yeah, the eclipse is like the climax at the end and so incredible, but there's all these cool little stories along the way. And yeah, what an adventure we went on. That was pretty cool to bring back those memories.
Mm-hmm. It was a cool trip. Definitely, I feel like it was life-changing for me, and I think a lot of us, it definitely was like a pretty special trip that I'll never forget. I think we're about wrapping up, guys. So yeah, thanks for rewatching it and letting us rewatch, and thanks for joining, throwing questions our way, and we can answer some questions in the comments on YouTube if we missed it here. Otherwise, yeah, we'll see you guys later.
Thanks for tuning in.
See you guys.